Hello, my name is Michael Willoughby. I'm a CFA charter holder and I hold a PhD in financial economics. Currently, I teach economics and finance at the University of California, San Diego. I'm here today to walk you through CFA Exam Level 3 Economics for Portfolio Management. If you're watching this video, you're probably preparing to take the Level 3 exam. If that's true, then I'm sure that I am reflecting the consensus of my colleagues in telling you that you've already achieved something very admirable in passing the first two exams. All you have to do now is stay focused. So do that. Let's get started with the session. We're going to start out by talking about capital market expectations. Now, throughout your study for the CFA exams, you've collected a lot of quantitative and qualitative information. At this point, the things that you need to study are going to be focused on portfolio management, and they're vast. I'm sure you already know that. The point here is that what you really need to do is organize the information that you've already collected and the things you've already learned. And that's what we'll do today as we walk through a discussion of the development of capital market expectations for portfolio management. So we'll begin first by outlining what the process is. You'll see that some of these steps are very familiar to you. Don't forget them. Just because they're familiar and you've seen them before doesn't mean that they've lost their importance. Let's take a look at those steps now. Capital market expectations are a step in the strategic asset allocation process. It's a macroeconomic approach. So your macroeconomic tools and essentials will help guide you in this process. And we'll go through a number of steps. Let's look at them now. We begin with the time horizon that you're working with for your client. So in each case, you'll be developing capital market expectations for a specific purpose and a specific client. Begin with the time horizon. The time horizon will help you set the historical period and the record within the historical period that you're going to use as a foundation for your analysis. Once you have the time horizon, you'll start looking for information. You'll gather both economic and financial information from a number of different sources. One of the things we'll do today is talk about these sources, and I'll try to help you identify some tips as well as some traps in the use of different types of information in this process. Of course, we're going to have certain methods and models that we'll use. Most of these you should be familiar with by now. Those models and the information will go together. Ultimately, you are going to have to make some interpretations. Don't hesitate to use your own judgment and experience in making these interpretations. That's your job. Once you've gone through the process, ultimately you'll need to determine expectations for the capital market. Be sure when you do this that you document it. Remember, these steps are systematic and they should be consistent. But one thing that you always need to do is document what you've chosen to do, what you've used, and how you came about the development of those expectations. Then lastly, monitor the actual outcomes and use that as feedback. Through the process, this time horizon is going to shrink. You'll need to look at what actually happened and go back, if necessary, and revise your capital market expectations. We'll begin now by looking at information sources. I've outlined a few steps, so let's get started. You're going to go after information based on the time horizon that you've already established, because that gives you a benchmark for the historical data that you're going to collect. But there are limitations to historical data, at least 4 that you should be aware of. First, you should be sure that you know the definition of the data that you're collecting. Exactly what is it that you're going to use. And you should know the construction of that data. What is it and how is it put together. Third, the information should be timely. It should be relatively easy to get, and it should reflect as nearly as possible the economic activity that it is intended to follow. And of course, it should be accurate. So make sure you know what's defined, how it's constructed, that it's current, and it's accurate. Now, I'm going to circle this because this is very, very important. It's easy to extrapolate. It's easy to take what happened yesterday and naively think that what happened yesterday is going to happen tomorrow. Don't do that. There's a couple of reasons why you shouldn't do that. Let me tell you a little story before I go into the reasons why. Imagine a couple of businessmen traveling together. Maybe they're sitting in first class on their flight. Maybe they're having a few drinks, maybe a few too many. They get up in the air, and not long after they take off, the plane loses one of its engines. The pilot comes on the intercom and tells everyone to be calm. It's okay. They can continue on the 3 engines that are still working. But they're going to be delayed in their arrival by 45 minutes or so. Not long after that, they lose another engine. The pilot comes on the intercom, calms the crew, the passengers, says we can continue on 2 engines, however, we're probably going to be delayed by about 3 hours. Just after that, they lose a 3rd engine. The pilot says this is highly unusual, however, this plane is built well, it's capable of flying on 1 engine, however, they're probably going to be up there for an extra 5 or 6 hours. At this point, one of the businessmen turns to the other businessman and says, gee, I hope that other engine holds up, or we'll be up here all night. A little lesson in extrapolation. Let's be careful with historical data, because within that data, we may encounter regime shifts. Regime shifts are nothing more than situations where an event may have occurred in the historical period that changes expectations or behavior, such that there's no continuous connection between the data that we see in the historical record, but a shift, a change, a revision that affected behavior back there. Also, we may encounter what's called non-stationarity. There may be situations in the past where some consistency has changed, the volatility has changed within in the series. In both cases, what's encountered is some event that's altering the consistency in the historical data. What we're going to do now is look at some statistical considerations. We're never going to get away from the use of statistics, so it's very important to at least understand and know what aspects of statistics are important to consider when we're thinking about and using data from the past. Okay, let's start talking about the statistical considerations in the use of our data. I'll give you a warning in advance. We're going to go through 7 different steps in the process of thinking about our data. No one expects you to memorize 7 different steps, but what we want you to do is just become familiar with the process of thinking about the data that you're going to use. Let's start those steps now. These are somewhat cautions in the use of statistical information. The very first, of course, begins, as we saw before, with thoughts about the definition and the construction of the information that you're going to use. And we start by considering measurement errors and biases in the data. So, first of all, a very simple problem in the measurement process of data is in the collection and transcription portion. There can be simple mistakes in transcription. There can be problems in collection. One that you should be aware of is that information collected may be intrusive, and in its intrusive nature, there may be some interaction between the surveyor and the surveyee